Hey everybody, Teddy Smythe here, Jessica Morse's campaign manager. Welcome to our first ever live question and answer. We're so excited. But first, Jessica Morse, welcome.
Thank you. Hi America. Thanks for joining us today.
Not just hi America, hi the world.
That's right.
Truly a global digital future.
Shout out to my friends in Nepal.
We're so excited to answer a bunch of questions today. We've been collecting them this week, so I've got a long list of voter questions. But if you have more, comment right now. Our team is monitoring. We will get them into the queue and we will ask them away. But to start, just to give you a little bit of an outline, I've sorted them into first experience, then a bunch of issue questions to cover where Jessica stands on the issues, and then a little bit of addressing some buzz, and then some general campaign questions about McClintock and what our path to victory is. So how's that sound?
Sounds great. Thanks for doing this.
Cool. Tune in, tell your friends, share away, and comment with more questions, but let's get started. From the top. Experience. So there's been a lot of questions about your experience and what your career was and why you're qualified for this job.
Yeah.
So the place I'd like to start, and we can walk through it, but the phrase we use a lot is national security strategist. What's that mean?
Thanks for asking. There's 3 branches to the U.S. national security strategy. You can go read the national security strategy if you feel really inspired, but it lays out defense, development, and diplomacy as 3 equal pillars of U.S. national security. And I worked in all 3 branches. I spent my entire career, 10 years, working in the Defense Department, the State Department, and USAID, including a year and a half in Iraq, side by side with our troops. And, and my degree is in public policy with a focus on national security and nuclear nonproliferation, and worked at a military command. So I spent my whole career in the national security field, and really honored. I've just been selected as one of the Truman National Security Fellows. And
whoa, congrats.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a big deal. For people who don't know, that's like a super prestigious fellowship that like a few people selected all across the country. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's great people, really excited to be part of it. And just have been grateful for a phenomenal career in that field.
Wonderful. Well, let's dig into it a little bit. So you went to Iraq. You joined USAID right out of college and then went to Iraq pretty shortly thereafter. Could you talk us through that and then what your work in Iraq looked like?
Absolutely. I first signed on with USAID right out of school. They picked me up because I had overseas experience. In college, I took a couple semesters and did an internship in Ethiopia with Save the Children, and did another internship in Nepal teaching women to be trekking guides. Small grassroots organization. So USAID, which is the U.S. Agency for International Development, hired me as the information officer in their D.C. office. And so I spent about 6 months writing different policy memos and Iraq reconstruction updates to the president, and drafted the congressional testimony for Condoleezza Rice. And it was a great job and fascinating moment of history to be part of. And a little bit horrifying, and then my counterpart in Iraq was injured, and so they asked me if I would go. And even though I had stood up against the war in Iraq, I recognized that when the house is on fire, you can't complain about who started the fire. You got to grab a hose and put it out. And so that's what I did. So I hopped on a plane to Iraq, age 23. I called my mom and I said, "Hey mom, I'm going to Iraq. Don't worry, this is for your own spiritual growth." And she was not thrilled. But off we went, and then, you just fly into this war zone, and we did a corkscrew landing into the Baghdad airport. I'm getting G-force on me as we land, and I look around, and the airport control tower shot out, and the runway's full of pockmarks from rockets and mortars, and I thought, what the hell have I just done? And it was an intense experience. My job initially when I was out there was the information officer, so I was documenting the impact our aid dollars were having on everyday Iraqis. So I was, in these convoys driving around Iraq, up in the Kurdish region. I went to Halabja, where Saddam Hussein had gassed the Kurds and had seen the aftermath of a chemical weapons attack on a community. And I met students at one of the universities in Sulaymaniyah who all told me that they want to be human rights lawyers to prevent atrocities like that ever happening again. And I met small business owners and people that were sort of rolling up their sleeves, trying to figure out how to get Iraq moving again. And it was really touching to see people just in the face of incredible obstacles, having the strength and stamina and ingenuity to make something out of such a difficult environment. And so I saw firsthand, what works and what doesn't. And then after 6 months of doing that, the average tour for an American civilian over there was about 6 months. So even though I was only 23 years old, I was one of the longer serving on the ground. And they asked me to take on a project establishing this training program to rebuild Iraq's civil service. I was basically cleanup for Iraq's debathification program and saw the consequence firsthand of having a gutted civil service and the consequence of those policies. So, knowing that we needed to make this happen, I ended up partnering with Iraq's Minister of Planning because I knew that this wouldn't work unless there was local ownership and unless it was locally led. Plus, I was seeing all the U.S. agencies kind of fumbling all over themselves. There was a lot of infighting, which wasn't productive. And so I brought the resources from USAID, and Iraq's Minister of Planning helped me design the program and took ownership over it. And then it was very easy to then coordinate the international community and the other U.S. agencies and bureaus within the State Department to have this consolidated effort. And because it was Iraqi-led, and that program ended up lasting for about 10 years, and the Iraqi government ended up purchasing it from the U.S.
Yeah, and that's super interesting. And I'll make just a little connection there. A lot of times, and we'll get to this, when you talk about issues, you ground them in local solutions, local driven, and it's really interesting that that's rooted in your early career almost in Iraq and how you found solutions there.
I saw that nothing works unless the people on the ground who are living in a community understand what that community needs, and ours is no exception. Whether it's broadband or rural hospitals or fire prevention, we know what our community needs, and we've heard the solution, and many of our local leaders have that. And you're right. It was that experience in Iraq, seeing people trying to sort of parachute in ideas and solutions and not having them come from the ground up. And I recognize that when they come from the ground up, when they're locally led, locally owned, and then they're actually going to be effective and endure, as opposed to people coming in just from the outside with pie in the sky ideas.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so then you came back to the U.S. and you were
actually USAID. They asked me one afternoon. They said, "Would you be interested in going and manning our USAID office in Fallujah?" And I said, "You know what? I've been here a year and a half. I think I'm good." And so. It was time to head back, and so they gave me the Iraq foreign aid budget at the State Department, and so, was that your question?
Yeah. Well then, okay. So then you were managing this budget. What did that budget look like? Did you have like a spreadsheet of all these dollars and how they were categorized out? Or I have these little spreadsheets that I use for my work for like planning our campaign. I can't fathom anything more than I don't know. What did that look like?
I had a $25 billion spreadsheet because I had the Iraq foreign aid budget was my portfolio from starting in 2002 until I was there up until 2008, and then you do a couple forward-year out budgets. So it was this huge budget of multiple accounts, and so I worked for the Director of Foreign Assistance, who was the Deputy Secretary of State, and I worked on a team that had global foreign aid, and my portfolio was Iraq, so I had that whole Iraq foreign aid budget, and it was a fascinating experience. They gave me that job. We used to joke in the office, like, here's Jessica's 25 years old and has a $25 billion budget. And, but the reason I had that level of responsibility was because I had been on the ground and seen the programs firsthand. I had a unique insight and unique experience that hardly anyone else had. And so I came in and had some great mentors and guides, and was really empowered by my leadership, and we went up to the Hill. I went up to the Hill and negotiated with Senate and House appropriation staffers, and worked with all of the agencies on the ground to make sure that we were being efficient and effective with our aid dollars, and we were really working on shifting the Iraq foreign aid budget from those big infrastructure programs, which were the billions and billions of dollars, to these small economic reform programs that would get guys back to work, so that they wouldn't be sort of hired into the insurgency, and do vocational training so that they could then not just do quick construction jobs, but actually graduate out and into a career and have microloans so that they could then start businesses, and then having a larger capital program so that then those businesses could grow and expand. And so it's sort of all the layers you need for economic development, and that was our strategy as we were trying to shift forward. And I saw the politics of it, and sort of lived through firsthand when political decisions override good policy decisions and long-term strategic thinking. And it's part of one of the motivators that makes me want to run for office, because I think we need people in office who are willing and have the courage to take the longer view and understand the consequences on the ground.
Yeah, and that's so cool. And I think, I don't know, I'll share a little bit of my personal story, but one of the big reasons I wanted to work for Jessica was because of this deep experience that she got really early in her career and then continued for a decade. That's just like mind-boggling. And it's a little hard for me to wrap my head around it until you talk about sort of the nuance of the layer of this $25 billion spreadsheet, and then later working with all these different agencies and on these big budgets. And I don't know, I feel like that's a lot of what a congressperson will do. And so you're really particularly and rarely well qualified for the position, which is part of the reason why some of I'll name them, attacks on Jessica's career have hurt me personally, because I'm like, well, look, actually, it's real, it's legit, it's impressive. And so I think part of what we're trying to answer here, and part of the questions we're going, we had a couple around national security strategists and what did your work look like in Iraq, but the bigger one is, what did that experience actually look like? Give us a little bit of nuance on it. So this has been really helpful for me and hopefully for our viewers. We have a couple issue questions coming in, just a couple more things on experience and career, and then we'll pivot.
Well, and a funny aside story is that it's kind of funny for me that these attacks keep coming in this narrative, because when I was in my career at State Department, what I would hear from colleagues later is they would all tell me sort of their first impression when they first saw me, you know, and they would say, "But you're so young, how can you be here?" And it's hilarious that 10 years later, I still get the same reaction. "But you're so young, how can you be here?" And then they would tell me that, "But then you opened your mouth and started talking, and then you brought us the solutions that we needed, and I earned my credibility." And I've been finding that in our community too, that it's that willingness to listen, you know, a need to take. I've found that in my career, throughout my career, that just being willing to keep my focus on serving rather than proving myself, you know, it takes the ego out of it, and it just creates a good solid foundation. And that's what's been effective here too. And that's why even in the face of attacks, our campaign has been doing great, and we've been getting a lot of support from everyone. And we can talk about that later. Yeah.
So just real briefly, because I want to pivot to questions in the next couple of minutes. But you were a Presidential Management Fellow at Pacific Command, an advisor to the Admiral. What was this? It was a fellowship. What did that look like? What does that mean?
It's a fairly, hopefully not to toot my own horn here, but it's a fairly prestigious way that the federal government hires people. There's multi-rounds of tests, and it's kind of the definition of a merit-based civil service. And so they, it's one of the myriad hiring mechanisms that the federal government has to bring you on as a GS, you know, civil service employee. I did that after graduate school, and so streamlining federal hiring mechanisms. It's a mission for me. And
then you went back to USAID.
Yes. Well, so at Pacific Command, I was the advisor to Admiral Willard on U.S.-India defense strategy. And for anyone who's kind of come on board, we have a really fun story about using renewable energy technology transfer to be a carrot to open up the U.S.-India defense relationship. And what I think a lot of people don't fully understand about a career in national security is people say, "Oh, we don't support, we don't think there should be more defense spending, and we hate the defense industrial complex, and we don't like war." My entire career has been dedicated to preventing conflict around the globe. It has been dedicated and devoted to understanding and defining the root causes of conflict and making the world safer and better and more stable so that we avoid war. And I understand the importance of investing in preventative and conflict prevention. And that's been my entire career and what I'm focused on.
Yeah, great. And that's, I don't know, it's just like the root of why you fight is so clear in that. To finish out the sort of career narrative, you're talking about experience. So you're at USAID until May of 2015. And then you took a year off. And talk a little bit about that if you're open to it.
No, you know, my mom passed away when I was in India, and it was really unexpected and tough, and I realized that the only thing she and I kind of had left undone, we were really close and would like chat, you know, twice a day, and she had always wanted to write this book about her great-grandmother, who was a suffragette and an early Broadway actress at the turn of the century, and just phenomenal woman, and who had died in a murder, and so she and I had always sort of wanted to dig into that as a project together, and I realized that my mom we hadn't done that, and so as a way to honor my mom's legacy, I decided to take a year off. I made a plan. I found my great-great-grandmother's letters in archives all over the country, and traveled all over the country looking into this life of this incredible, really early American career woman, and it's the story of the making of the modern American woman. Her life was phenomenal, and I was so inspired to read her letters and to find all the thousands of newspaper articles about her. And I was writing that book and just really feeling this is a way I could honor my mother's legacy. And then Trump happened. You know, Trump got the nomination, and I had to kind of rip myself out of the turn of the century suffragette movement that I was writing about and plant myself in our modern era. When Trump got the nomination and said he was going to give nuclear weapons to Saudi Arabia, I thought, nope, I've been trying to end conflict around the world. And so I called the presidential campaign and I said, wherever you need me, I will go. And I just dropped everything in my life and I went. And immediately after the campaign, I was thinking about maybe sort of running in 2020 and writing a book. And then McClintock came out in lockstep with Trump, and I thought, this is not good enough for my community, you know, and for my family, and he's not good enough for our country, and has failed his oath to the Constitution. See, the sign even agrees. It's like wilting because it's so sad about McClintock. And
new office, new signs.
Exactly. And so, so that's when I decided to run and have just dedicated my whole life to this effort and endeavor. And we're at an amazing historical precipice. And it is, and you know, as part of writing the book is what gave me some of the courage. You know, because I watched Adele, my great-great-grandmother, break through barriers that were set up for women. And when I looked around and realized women only made up 20% of most elected bodies in the U.S., Iraq actually has 25% of its parliament as women, then I realized, what would Adele do? You know, what would these incredibly strong women in my family do? And I realized they would run headfirst at the problem. And she wouldn't balk at it, and she would dive in headfirst. And that's what I'm doing. And I think she'd be proud of me. And I think it's a really neat way to honor my mother's legacy. You know?
Yeah, that's super moving. I appreciate you sharing that. And a little bit by way of my experience, but I also worked on the presidential campaign. And I just know how hard it was both to do that work of being in the field, organizing volunteers, knocking doors, calling voters, and super humble to say, like, hey, look, this is where I need to be. This is how I'm going to fight. The stakes are this high. This is where I need to be. And so I appreciate that, and I'm glad you're running and you stepped up and you're sort of following in that legacy.
Well, I'm glad you're on the team.
No, of course. Let's pivot to issues. We're getting lots of live questions coming in. So I'm going to start with the live ones and then do the emailed ones, if that's okay. Yeah, sure. We're doing okay on time. The first one from Luann is about
Hi, Luann.
forests. What are your plans for wildfire mitigation and responsible forestry practices? How do we keep our local rural firefighters when they're getting paid basically minimum wage? So let's start with wildfire mitigation and forestry management, and then talk about employing rural firefighters, because that's not as one that we've talked about as much, and is Crucial.
Yes, absolutely. So what I like to point out to people is that forest fire, it's not a partisan issue, right? A forest fire doesn't ask if you're Republican or Democrat before it burns down your home. Also, forest fires are not just natural disasters, right? These are political disasters. Our forests are in such a dangerous position right now because we clear-cut the Comstock lode at the turn of the century, clear-cut our forests in the Sierra. All the old growth is gone. And then it grew back overly dense, and then we suppressed wildfires for nearly 100 years. Wildfire is a natural cleaning mechanism for a forest. It's supposed to go through every 5 to 10 years, clear out the underbrush, clear out the weak trees. A lot of our Native American tribes were actively doing this and doing controlled burning for thousands of years in our mountains, maintaining the right forest density and forest health. And so people say, "Oh, let our forests be wild." What they miss, and what you get when you talk to forest ecologists and people in our Forest Service, is that a healthy forest is a managed forest. You can't just neglect it and walk away. And so we had the Smokey the Bear policy for a century that said all forest fires are bad and suppressed all the forest fires. So Smokey the Bear, I am sorry to tell you, is not our friend. And
oh no!
I know.
Smokey, my boy.
We can revive him and redirect him to better policy. But the Forest Service caught up with this. Back in the 80s and the 90s, they started recognizing that we needed to have controlled burning, and ecologists were saying this, and yet we didn't have the funding to go behind it. We didn't have the funding to get in front of it. What we are facing now is a lack of adequate funding and investment in fire prevention. This is a huge job creation opportunity for our district, and it's actually a cost savings. It cost $72 million to contain the Butte fire. It cost $2,000 to build the fire break outside of McCollum Hill that saved the town from the Butte fire. McClintock generally proposes about $40 million a year in fire prevention funding. All of that funding gets put into fire containment during wildfire season, and so there's not enough in there for us to get ahead of fires. And so we need to put a radical and dramatic investment into fire prevention to make our communities safe. We need to be thinning our forests. We need to be building fire breaks. I mean, even guys with ATVs, we can have our ecologists identify which paths need to be cut and direct them to maintain some of these fire breaks for us with forerunners. There's lots of good solutions out there. That's not like the top priority one, but it's just a fun idea. But
and then real quick, firefighters and employing rural firefighters.
Yeah, no, one of my cousin Kyle, I don't know if he's watching. Hi, Kyle. Works for Cal Fire, and so for me, when I think about fire season, I am often afraid for him. Our family, when we see these big raging forest fires, we know that he's out on the front lines, and his life is in danger. And so I feel motivated to make fires better. But yes, there's a dramatic difference between what Cal Fire pays versus the county versus the Forest Service. I was talking to a young man a few weeks ago who is, I think he was a county paid firefighter, and these different local municipal fire districts have a whole range of things that they can afford. And some of them are doing great, and some of them are nearly bankrupt. And so we need to have consistent funding for fire prevention across every mechanism in our district, and ensure that they're coordinated and partnered, and that starts with ensuring a salary that recognizes the risk that our firefighters are putting their lives on the line. I mean, if you go down, even I think some of the signs are still up today, but when I went down to support the victims of the Detweiler fire earlier this year, the signs were completely, that's not working. They were completely, all the signs were up saying, "Thank you, firefighters, and everybody had a story of the firefighters coming up and saving their town, and saving our community. So, fire prevention is absolutely crucial. And like I said, it's not a partisan issue. When I was at that relief center for the Detweiler fire victims, I found that we needed I found that nobody was asking if they're Republican or Democrat. everyone was seeing themselves as members of a community coming together to solve a problem and serve a community. And that's what our campaign needs to do too. And what politics should do, right, is get everyone to start breaking down these partisan barriers and recognizing that these are issues that impact all of us, and therefore we need solutions for all of us.
Totally agree. Solutions for all of us that work for everybody in our community that are local driven. Sorry to jump up there, just trying to find some tape to keep our good friend here up on the wall. We're going to rapid fire some issue
Grassroots
questions.
campaign.
Grassroots campaign here. This is our new office, by the way. We'll give you a tour. We'll invite you to the opening very soon. But that's why it's a little bit bare bones, but lovely and happy.
Oh, let's do a plug for the opening right now.
Office opening next Tuesday. You better be there. Roseville, 920 Reserve Drive. We'll send directions around and make a Facebook event, but would love to see you there, 6 p.m.
It's going to be so fun.
Yeah, we have an office. We're here. We're committed to organizing. We want to welcome you in. Okay, issues, rapid fire. What are your thoughts related to the recent tax reform that McClintock voted for, sidebar, and if you're elected, how will you protect Californians? I think those are two sort of different, but
Sure.
In the context of tax reform.
The tax bill was specifically vindictive against Californians. It didn't, things like the Detweiler fire wouldn't be covered under the new law, and it also increases the salt tax by eliminating your ability to deduct your state taxes off of your federal income tax. It disproportionately impacts Californians. And remember that California is what's called a donor state, right? We actually put more out in taxes as a state than we get back in from the federal government. So to be penalized and hurt, the salt deductions impact 4 in 10 people in our district at an average price of $5,000 a person. It indicates that we don't have a representative who's willing to fight for our interests, and we need one.
Great. And that question was from Susan. Thanks, Susan.
Hi, Susan.
From Huberto. Did you agree with some Democrats that voted for a continuing resolution without DACA or a Clean Dream Act?
What frustrated me about this process is that everyone was asking who will get blamed, and no one was asking the question of who will get hurt, right? Who gets hurt if 800,000 dreamers are ripped from their families and their jobs and the community that raised them and deported? Who gets hurt if 9 million children don't get access to health care? Who gets hurt if the government shut down like the way it did in 2013 when all of our businesses, Yosemite shut down and all of our businesses outside of Yosemite shut down? We need policy thinkers who are willing to think bigger picture and willing to fight for what is right on every level. Like, it shouldn't be a trade-off question, that we need to change the political culture so that there's not this trade-off, that we automatically fight for what's right. And it is right to keep the government open. It is right to have a Clean Dream Act and support dreamers. And it is right to give children access to health care. And we need, as a government and as a country, to start thinking in those bigger terms.
Yeah, great and unequivocal. So I admire that. The next question is from two people, actually. Eric and Vera both asked a little bit about contrast in the Democratic primary, and this is something that comes up. But Vera says that all the candidates, you and Georgina and Rosa, have presented yourselves really well. How are your views different, or how would you advise primary voters to think about the Democratic primary? Because that's what we're talking about.
Sure.
Why should they vote for you?
Yeah. First of all, it's exciting to have 3 women running. This is an amazing moment in history. When I stood at that women's march with my little sign that said, "Don't just march, run," out in DC last year, or 2016 or 27. Anyway, at the first one, I am honored and proud to be standing side by side with other women running. And I think the difference is experience, on a big level, that if you look at what's asked of somebody in Congress, it's national security, it's federal budget. And that's been where my career has focused. So I'm going to not have an uphill climb getting into Congress. Part of the reason I've been able to get a lot of support from our local elected leaders is by talking about real solutions and how I can partner with them, because I know what it's going to take. when I sat down with the Southern Sierra Miwok tribe to talk about getting, what the obstacles are to their federal recognition, I heard that they're saying their case has just been delayed and slow-rolled and delayed by the, Department of Interior. And I realized that I know exactly how to send an intern down to that deputy secretary's office every single day, or that assistant secretary's office. And I know how to call them up in front of congressional hearings. And I know how to hold their, kind of hold their budget accountable until they actually follow through on these things. I know how to apply pressure in the right areas because I have experience in government. I'm kind of on the receiving end of it, honestly, from Congress. But I know what works and what doesn't, and so that's why I'm going to be effective on that level. I think. Yeah.
Well, just that's super interesting and nuanced, and it's a way that you as a congressperson can actually push agencies to do good by our community.
Yeah.
And knowing like the pathways of all this, both complex budget and all the different agencies that are out there, that honestly, I'm a campaign professional, but I can't fathom that.
Mm-hmm.
And so knowing that landscape and how to navigate it is really compelling. And it sounds like it'll, set you up for great success to fight for us.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's sort of distinguishing is just the momentum of our campaign. It's going to take, three things to take on McClintock. It's going to take resources. It's going to take which resources get you a message that you can project, and a field operation that can scale. And as we have outraised McClintock both our quarters, 2 quarters in a row, ended up with more cash on hand than he had. And that we're just one of a handful of races across the country to have done that. And so that's huge. And what that means is that we were able to open our campaign office, right? Our headquarters. We're able to hire this phenomenal team. We're able to start hiring professional field organizers who are scaling and mobilizing our hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who are already active and supporting our campaign. And I think that's why we're getting endorsements, from phenomenal people, like Ro Khanna. Congressman Ro Khanna endorsed us, and Congresswoman Julia Brownlee, who's amazing on fire prevention, and Congressman Jared Huffman, who's one of our leaders on environmental issues. And I think in terms of the issues, most of us are the same. I think, I support universal health care. I think Regina supports sticking with the Affordable Care Act and improving it. But I probably have a lot more sort of local nuance on environmental challenges and turning them into energy and job creation for our district. But as I've been getting support from environmentalists because I'm incredibly fierce and committed to putting a price on carbon that is going to, stop the Earth from warming any more than 2 degrees so we can keep our ski industry. I can see the local and the national links to the issues in our district, and we're working to solve them.
Great.
Do you have any ideas on that, Teddy? I mean, you're really
on which
on what distinguishes our campaign.
Well, I don't think I'll talk candidates besides thinking that and believing in Jessica's vision for our district and her path to victory. But I'll dwell on path to victory. I think we have the team, the story, the resources, and the grassroots energy to win. And I think that sense of hope, that sense of urgency, that sense of we will work with hundreds and thousands of people across the district to knock on every door, to go down roads that have never had an organizer, never had a volunteer go through with Walklet and a packet and say, knock, knock, hi. What do you want to see your congressional representative fight for? What do you want to see out of your representatives? And in so many places in this district, people have never had that sort of conversation at their door, and we will do that fully at scale in every one of the 10 counties across our district, from Alpine, from Twain Harte to, everywhere. I don't want to get too far down that list.
We'll go register rangers in Yosemite to vote.
And so I think that commitment to grassroots organizing and the ability to run a really big program that executes on it will allow us to turn out the votes we need to win. And at the end of the day, that's what matters, right? Tom McClintock has misrepresented this district for far too long. Jessica Morse is ready to fight. So I think that's really exciting.
Yeah, good.
I think that's the biggest. More issues, rapid fire. thoughts about SB1 and road maintenance in all these rural counties. And for context for everybody, SB1 is the road maintenance, it would create the road maintenance and rehabilitation program. In short, it would increase the taxes on gas, it would increase the fees on vehicle licenses. I believe I'm doing this off the top of my inbox, so bear with me if I get anything wrong here. But it also funds an account that maintains roads and rehabilitates them.
Sure. One of the challenges we face in rural counties is that the population is really small. And yet the use, particularly in Tahoe and Yosemite and Sierra, is really intense. So, for example, Mariposa County has something like 18,000 residents. Someone can fact check that for me. But anyway, there's several tens of thousands of people in the whole county. But Yosemite gets 5 million visitors a year who drive on their roads. And so when infrastructure is funded through vehicle registration, it doesn't equate to the level of use on the roads. And so we actually need to have federal funding for infrastructure. We're trying to kind of tax and chip away at it in these small ways. We just need to make a commitment for our budget needs to be our priorities, and we need to prioritize infrastructure. This is America. This is a country that can afford good, beautiful roads that are safe, that don't have rock slides coming down them and closing the roads and closing people off from the parks, that don't have potholes. I mean, we had a section of Highway 50, not too far from my house, come crashing down last year, year before. And that's not acceptable in our country. We know that we know what the problems are. We need to invest in the solutions. So I am willing and ready to put a real investment into infrastructure because it is cheaper to fix it on the front end than have it stagnate out the back end.
Yeah, great. I appreciate that. And a great question from Rebecca. Thanks, Rebecca. The next question in the comment section, I'm going to reframe a little bit because it's definitely a loaded question. But they're asking about two things. One, in short, what will you do to fight for the LGBTQ community here? Let's start there, and then we'll do the second.
Sure. And I don't know if we want to pull Mel in on this one, too. She's sitting right here. Yes, I am going to be
And Mel has been one of our advisors in LGBTQ issues in particular.
Yes. Yes, I am obviously a fierce advocate for the LGBTQ community and have been. In high school I was part of the Gay Straight Alliance, right? Right at Mira Loma, and feel that everybody has a right to who they love, and that somebody's sexual orientation should not define what businesses they can be welcomed into or not, or should not define who, what jobs they're qualified for or not. And so it is a civil rights issue, and that's what our country is founded on. I'm Mel, can I call you out? I'm really honored to have someone like Mel and Erica on my team, and my friend Andy, and I think there was a point that 4 of our 5 team members were LGBTQ when we first started out, and of the original team, and it's easier. I'm a fierce advocate, but it's easy to fight for it when I'm looking straight at Mel and saying this is what's right in our country and in our community, and that's what we stand for. So I don't know.
Yeah, great. Full stop.
Yeah,
we will fight.
It's the right thing.
And it's one of many equal rights issues of our time. The second part of the question here was referencing your upbringing in the Christian Science faith.
Is this kind of a question?
I know. But this has been coming up, and I think we should address it head on.
Sure.
Because you were raised in a faith tradition. What does that mean? Will that affect how you govern?
Yeah.
And how has that affected who you are as a person?
Sure. Like many Americans, I was raised in a faith tradition. It is one of the founding principles of our country to have freedom to worship and not have that define where you can work or whether or not you can serve. John F. Kennedy put this beautifully, where when he was attacked for being a Catholic and people were questioning whether or not the Pope was going to control the Democratic Party, he came out and said, we need to defend the separation of church and state. And that means that we have to stand up and demand that there's not a religious test to get into office, right? That is part of the separation of church and state. And so I have been rather stunned that people are talking about my policies are unequivocal and clear, right? I mean, heck, I took a year off to write a book about early lesbian history, with my great-great-grandmother. And my healthcare policies are clear. But people kept saying, oh, you're religious. Are you part of the religious right? And I called my friend, when I first heard this line of argument, it really surprised me. And I called my friend Feiruz, who's going to be the first Muslim woman elected to office, she's running for Congress right now. And she was getting religious discrimination, for being a Muslim. And, we had this rather profound discussion that there was religious intolerance coming in across the political spectrum, and that as Americans, we need to stand up and fight against that. We need to demand and recognize that the First Amendment protects religious freedom in this country, and that if you hear anybody saying that anyone is unqualified to do something because of their religion, we all need to take a stand and say that's wrong, that's un-American, and that undermines the strength of our country. And so I have zero tolerance for religious bigotry and intolerance, which it was just surprising to see it coming at me. It was funny, I talked to a couple Christian scientists who had been in Congress for a long time, and I said, how did you handle these attacks? And one of them, he said, I was in public office for 37 years, and it never once came up. And so we need to set a higher bar than this. And we're doing it. I'm grateful for everyone who's spoken out against this and is taking a hard stand. John F. Kennedy said that 40,000 Catholics weren't disqualified from public office the moment they were baptized. And that's the stance we need to uphold today. And really proud of everyone who fights for religious freedom in this country. It's important.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks for talking about that head on. And sometimes there's buzz, sometimes there's questions, and so we want to be open to those and give you the real answers, give you the real Jess. So hopefully this will be the start of that tradition and the continuation of it with all the house parties across the district. But thank you. Rapid fire issues. Let's go. Nope, that one's too deep. Sorry. Would you support, this is the one that's too deep, but we'll just go for it. Would you support a constitutional amendment that money is not First Amendment protected speech? In short, do you support campaign finance reform?
Yes, of course we support.
Is money free speech?
Yeah, so they're asking, should we repeal, we'll need a constitutional amendment to repeal Citizens United. We need that. Absolutely, sort of end full stop. There are some things we can do in the meantime. I am fully supportive and completely behind campaign finance reform, and because getting money out of politics is critical. What I often tell people is if we want to get big money out of politics, we have to get little money in. And so I've been grateful for everyone who has already invested in our race and supported. We had well over 2,000 individual contributions, and I'm really honored to have that support. I tell people, put your lunch money where your mouth is, if you believe that, campaigns should be financed by the public, then you should take $5 and put it into a campaign that you believe in. Yeah. And
if you're watching right now, there's a link. Can somebody comment the donate link? We would love and appreciate your help. And if you've already pitched in, thank you.
That's right. Instead of saying honk for support, if you believe in campaign finance reform, donate $5 to my campaign right now. There you go.
Thank you. Great.
Yeah.
Rapid fire.
Okay.
How would you attract high-paying jobs to our community?
Yes.
It's hard to do that with one rapid fire.
No, honest, I think there's a whole array of opportunities. First thing we need is strong investment in vocational training so that people are prepared for these jobs. We're having trouble hiring people into our rural hospitals, so we need to start training these kids in high school and beyond so that they can be prepared to go into rural hospital jobs, because they want to live in rural communities. Yeah. There's tons of opportunity for green energy and renewable energy. Those are high-paying jobs. we had, what was it, 3,000 jobs in our district were solar jobs, I think, somewhere along those lines. And but those are all impacted by the solar tariff, right? The solar panel tariff. And so we need to be able to protect and expand high-paying jobs in our district. I've been really grateful to talk to Sierra Business Council, who is thinking about getting high-paying jobs in biomass, or we can invest good jobs in water infrastructure, taking our old gold rush flume era and clay pipes from the 30s, water canals and pipes that we lose 30% of our water in the Sierra through old infrastructure. And so investing in new infrastructure not only saves our water, saves us money because we don't have to then pay for drought disasters, and it creates good high-paying jobs. So I want to take all of the challenges we're having as a community and turn that into good high-paying jobs and safe investments for our region.
Love that. And another thing you often talk about here is education and access to higher education.
Yes.
Just real quick, talk about community college and vocational training and apprenticeships.
Absolutely. Yes, I am a big advocate. Community college, first of all, needs to be free, right? Sierra College has, 18,000 students in it? That should be free. Anyone who graduates from our high schools should be able to go to community college or even state college for free. And then to get access to higher education, I would like to see a service tuition program where if students are willing to do, that's a similar concept to the GI Bill. If students do 2 years of service in AmeriCorps or Rural Hospital or legal aid or something, that they earn several years of tuition to a college of their choice. And so have students getting that commitment to service early on.
And just to chime in, I think that's a great creative way that we can expand access to higher education.
Exactly.
Besides saying unequivocally people must have it. Let's find ways to make it work.
Well, and I saw such a huge impact in my own life. I was really grateful to have gotten scholarships to both undergraduate and graduate school. And it just set me up to serve, right? It gave me the freedom to take a government job that doesn't pay as much as, corporate jobs. And I had the freedom to be able to do that because my school was paid for, was free.
Yeah.
And McClintock. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, great. Rapid fire. How will you address women's health and the right to choose? And how will you defend the right to choose?
Yeah, absolutely. I had a nice breakfast this morning with a woman who was the executive director of Planned Parenthood for 24 years here in California, and saw that she lived through sort of this transition of expanding women's reproductive rights. I am fiercely committed to having women have authority and choice and freedom over their own bodies, right? Nobody wants more abortions, right? But we want is to have women have access to health care. We want to, and the best way to start preventing abortions is through access to reproductive through groups like Planned Parenthood and birth control and education, and having access to that is amazing. We only have one Planned Parenthood in the whole district. And that is an affordable way that women can go get breast cancer screenings and promote women's health. And we need to be able to have a compassionate and calm discussion about this as a nation, and I think we're not quite there yet.
Yeah, and I think something else that's really strong in your policy platform is fighting for universal health care, which unequivocally covers women's health care.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. Next question. A couple questions about your fundraising.
Yes.
And to start the first one.
Thank you to everyone who's donated.
I believe this is from Melanie. I might have gotten mixed up in my channels. But to what do you attribute? To what do you attribute your impressive fundraising record, which has gotten a lot of national press? And then another one from Eric. He was noting that you've raised a bunch of money in the Bay Area. And in district, but also in the Bay Area and across Northern California. Why is that, and why are people getting inspired by your vision for our district?
Yeah, I think people are getting excited. Nobody has invested in this race since 2008, right, from outside our district, really. No one took this race seriously. And when I started going around and telling people, look, we have to take out McClintock. I am a public servant. And I think the reason I had such a good, strong foundation initially was that I started out with a listening tour of the district. Right? Before I filed officially as a candidate, I spent 3 months from April until June touring the district, meeting with county supervisors, local mayors, CAL FIRE chiefs, hospital boards, school boards. I met with people in all 10 counties to talk about the issues that were facing our community. So then when I went to donors, I was able to have a very sincere and earnest plea saying, the leaders in our community understand what we need on the ground. What we are lacking is an advocate at the federal level, and I am ready to do that. And I am ready to be that advocate, and I need your support to get me elected. And people invested. People were ready to invest. I think a lot of people also said, well, you can't win this district unless you can get Republicans on board. And I was able to demonstrate that, I come from a Republican family, and I've gotten them all on board with our campaign. And it was because I was able to bridge that partisan divide and get people to look at things through a community divide. And having this sort of innovative, creative, and inspiring approach to a campaign is what is getting people to invest. I had somebody give up a vacation so that he could invest in my campaign. I had, a 13-year-old girl say that all she wanted for her birthday was a new member of Congress and hold a Morse for Congress birthday party. She invited me to her birthday, and she asked her guests to donate to my campaign. People are willing to sort of sacrifice to be able to support this race, and I'm humbled and honored and grateful, but it's the enthusiasm, that we need. And just like we saw in Virginia or Alabama, when you can get national resources into those races that have a local and community-driven message, that's what takes it to the next level. That's what let you flip your seat in Virginia by 26 points?
26 points.
With a first-time female candidate.
We won by 26 points.
Yeah, you won by 26 points.
Yeah.
That's just phenomenally amazing.
Well, and this year we're going to see a wave here in the 4th District, unequivocally.
Yeah.
People are tired of being represented by somebody who doesn't even live here and looking for some degree of hope, participation, and real representation. And Jessica brings that. So I'm really excited. Okay, more issues. 30 seconds. Affordable housing.
We need it. And I am fighting for it. And we need to be able to have the government sort of close that gap. That this is what the developers, this is where the price point is for affordable housing. Here's what developers need to be able to build the affordable housing. The government has to close that gap. And right now it's a patchwork quilt of things to do it. And, whether it's cap and trade money or those, private activity bonds through HUD that are disappearing under the new tax bill. And we need to be able to put a smart investment, because if we can solve the affordable housing crisis, which is plaguing our entire district, and it also then improves people's living standards, improves their wages, right? Because they're not commuting for hours and hours. They're getting more bang for their buck. It improves the caliber of life for our workers. It takes away from the amount of childcare that they need to find. It would allow people's livelihoods, and it also improves our environment because you're not adding all that gas driving to the roads every day.
Yeah, and within the affordable housing question, somebody asked about solving homelessness and making sure everybody has a home.
Yeah.
How does that relate to affordable housing?
You know how I present this in our district particularly is that, McClintock says the government should do nothing. I point out that there's a cost to doing nothing. And on homelessness, you can easily calculate that price. Town of Placerville calculated that it costs $35,000 per homeless person per year in terms of hospital stays and police intervention. That's the price for doing nothing on homelessness. They did a tent city experiment for a year, which cost, I think, somewhere around the $10,000 range. They got 10 people into affordable jobs and homes. That saved their town $350,000 per year by making a one-time investment to solve the problem. And so we need to start thinking of these challenges and how do we address the root causes of homelessness and help people be safe, whether it's mental health or drug addiction or PTSD, or barriers, healthcare bankruptcy. We need to be able to address the root causes and solve this for the long run rather than putting Band-Aids on the problem.
Totally agree. We have about 4 or 5 minutes left. So I want to spend another 2 minutes on a couple issues.
Okay.
And then there are a couple great questions about the campaign, and I want to dive into those really fast too. From Nan, what's your position on gun control, and how will you sell your position in our red district? Quote.
Well, I like to be able to present a picture of me and a dog and a gun and a pheasant. I grew up pheasant hunting and duck hunting with my dad here, and even got, after kindergarten, he would pick up me and my sister and take us out to the duck blind to pick up shotgun shells and get a nickel a piece to get them. So anyway, I get our community, and California has some of the strictest gun standards in the country. And so there's nothing I can do at the federal level that's going to be more than what we already are living under. And our gun owners feel sort of relieved when I explain that to them. That the 2-week waiting periods and background checks are not inhibiting people any more than getting a driver's license. Inhibits folks from getting to drive their car. And so being able to sort of inspire gun safety and a culture of gun safety in our community is really important.
Great. This one's more of a thematic one, and it's a little loaded, but I'll quote. Do you just represent the people who voted for you, or do you try to stand in the middle and compromise in an attempt to represent everyone? How do you think about representing people who voted for you versus everybody versus just the middle? What does that look like, or what's your?
I think the premise of the question is a little off, right? The premise is that you have to compromise to be able to represent your entire community, and what I have found is that the root issues that we are going to be fighting for in this district do affect and represent everyone. Whether it's on immigration, for example. I was talking to a business owner who's a Republican and saying that he is having a hard time finding workers because our immigration system is so complicated and so cumbersome and hurting people, and it's also killing our business, right? And so you don't have to compromise on that to be able to meet the needs of our community, right? To be able to expand our workforce and to be able to have to have immigration reform, right? That actually supports everyone in our community. Forest fire, or access to broadband, or preventing homelessness, right? Homelessness is not a Democrat or Republican issue. Like I just laid out, you have to be able to look at the cost savings and bring the entire community on board, help people stop looking at things through a partisan lens. That's where you start making sort of trade-off, zero-sum compromises, right? If you're only looking at things through a partisan lens. If you look at it through a community lens, see the entire spectrum of the problem, and then tackle the root of the problem, then you don't have to give things up, right? You can actually bring people on board with a vision and demonstrate how it's a win for everyone to save money and end homelessness,
Yeah, that's so strong, and I think that's relatively rare in candidates to see both an uncompromising nature on the issues and on the values, but an orientation around finding solutions that work for everybody, that bring everybody in our community together and build us up.
Well, I used to work with foreign countries. Remember? Like if you talk about a constituency that's harder to sort of bring on board, and when you work with foreign countries, you're not sort of thinking. You have to think in terms of what gives everybody a win, but what's enduring, what's lasting, not what's politically expedient, and so that's why I was talking about earlier with like when our politicians were asking who gets hurt or who gets blamed rather than who gets hurt, we're starting from the wrong premise. Right? If you ask who gets blamed, that's where you make bad compromises. If you start with who gets hurt, it allows you to be grounded and find a solution that's actually going to work going forward.
Great. I think that's a really strong place to end. Actually, I have one last question coming in from Amy Champ. Hi, Amy. Hi, how are you?
Hi, Amy.
This is on rural isolation on issues in leadership. The state's addressing a lot of issues, new housing funds, green energy. How do you propose to connect congressional action, so what happens on the federal level, with what the state of California is doing? And how will we motivate local rural leaders to avail themselves of what the state is doing or to take better action on our behalf? So
I
state
think,
versus federal, and how would you work to motivate rural leadership?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really kind of getting down to a question of like, how do you get things done for our community, right, as an elected member of Congress? And so it gets back to that question of what does it mean to be a partner at the federal level, right? Our local leaders have good ideas, but right now Congress is getting resources back to communities only through grants. And so if you want to be able to get access to whether it's rural broadband, rural health care, education, you have to apply for grants. That means you need to have a congressional representative who's going to be advocating for those grants and who's going to be dedicating volunteers and staff to helping you write those grants, right? We need to be able to have someone who is a partner with our county supervisors and our local mayors and the state, and to be able to have strategies that link community at every level, right? It's not all that different than what I was doing sort of in principle, doing foreign aid work. Foreign aid work, your goal is to create sort of layers of community infrastructure that support each other up the chain until you have solutions and clear lines of communication. Our chain is broken right now because McClintock is not representing our district. I am going to be representing our district, fighting for our community. I understand the issues. We have been lacking a rural voice here to speak for us on the federal level, and that is exactly what I'm going to be doing, representing everyone in our district, because it's going to take us working together as a community to solve these challenges. And I would be so grateful for your support, and I would be grateful for your vote.
Me too. Okay, great. Last thing to ask about. How can people get involved? I'd like to pass it to a very special guest, actually. Or not guest, but our friend and coworker, Allie Boyer. Can I introduce you, Allie?
Come on in, Allie. Allie, tell everyone where you're from.
Hi, guys. So I grew up in Coarse Gold.
Yosemite High.
Went to Yosemite High. Super excited to be here on Jess's campaign. This is my 4th campaign, which is totally wild. But I think that, we can really bring new leadership to Congress with Jess. And I'm really excited to talk to some voters. So my job is the field director. So I will be coordinating with volunteers, voters, making sure we knock on every single door. Yes, I do mean every door. I know we're going to have to drive a lot. That's okay. We're willing.
We can hike there too.
Exactly. We have our hiking boots already. But yeah, super excited. We're also going to be rolling out a neighborhood team leader model. So if you guys want to knock on doors in your neighborhood, send me an email. I'll put my contact info in the comments, so they're super easy to find, and you guys can send me an email address or shoot me a message on Facebook. Super excited to get to know everybody.
Yeah, well, thanks just excited to have, thanks for your leadership on this, Allie, and bringing all your experience. It's like 4 national campaigns, and now you're back home.
Yeah, excited to be back home.
Yeah.
It's the most beautiful district in the country, I do have to say.
I know that because I hiked the whole thing.
Awesome.
Well, great. Well, thanks, y'all. I think we have to wrap now. We're a little bit over. I think we have to wrap now. We're a little bit over time, but this has been a joy. Thanks for commenting. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for asking all these wonderful questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to yours. We'll get it next time. Or come see us at our office opening next Tuesday, and you can ask in person.
All right. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks. Bye.